Next, let's talk about iodines. So a 1 is to 20,000 solution is said to be bactericidal in 1 minute and kills spores in 15 minutes. And a tincture of iodine USP contains 2% iodine and 2.4% sodium iodide in alcohol. And it is the most active antiseptic for intact skin. It is not commonly used due to serious hypersensitivity reactions and staining of clothing and dressings. Complexes of iodine with a surface is the active agent such as polyvinyl pyrrolidone or your PVP or our very common povidone iodine. So they kill vegetative bacteria, mycobacteria, fungi, and lipid-containing viruses. They may be sporicidal with prolonged use, and they can be used as antiseptics or disinfectants, and having the latter containing more iodine. And the iodophore solution must be diluted according to the manufacturer's direction to obtain full activity. They are less irritating and has less likely to produce skin hypersensitivity. They require drying time on skin before becoming active. And although iodophores have a somewhat broader spectrum of activity than chlorhexidine, including sporicidal action, they lack its persistent activity on skin. Next would be chlorine. Chlorine is a strong oxidizing agent and is considered as a universal disinfectant. It is commonly available, your household bleach, that is 5.25% sodium hypochlorite. And a 1 is to 10 dilution of bleach is about 0.525% equals 500 ppm available chlorine. And this is the recommended by CDC for disinfecting blood spills. So you do not need to memorize this one. It's just for you to know that as you increase in a different amount of your ppm, it can kill different types of microorganisms accordingly. So it is best stored in pH of 7.5 to 8.0 tap water in an opaque, tightly closed container. And if you frequently open it, it will reduce its activity, and the activity declines over time if not stored properly. So it is inactivated by blood, serum, feces, and other protein-containing materials. That is why if you're going to clean a surface stained by blood, you should remove the blood first with soap and water, and then you disinfect using your chlorine. And the active biocidal agent of chlorine is your hypochlorous acid. If it is mixed with your formaldehyde, it will form bis-chloromethyl, which is considered a carcinogen. And if you mix it with an acid or urine, it will form a chlorine gas, which can be an irritant. And they are said to be corrosive to aluminum, silver, and stainless steel. Next are your quaternary ammonium compounds. These are water-repellent hydrocarbon chain, and they are charged with nitrogen groups. And the mechanism of action is inactivation of your energy-producing enzymes, denaturating protein, and disrupting your cell membranes. It is said to be bactericidal for gram-positive bacteria and moderately active against gram-negative bacteria. It also contains fungistatic, sporistatic, and even algaecidal effects. It is effective against lipophilic viruses. However, it is not effective against mycobacteria, bacterial spores, and hydrophilic viruses. It is mostly used for sanitation of non-critical surfaces such as floors or bench tops, and commonly in food production facilities due to its low toxicity. It is not recommended for antiseptic use with risk of contamination with Pseudomonas and other gram-negative bacteria, and is said to be linked to infection outbreaks. Next are your formaldehyde and glutaraldehyde. So these are used for disinfection and sterilization of heat-sensitive instruments such as fiber optic endoscopes, respiratory therapy equipment, hemodialyzers, and dental instruments. They are not corrosive to metal, plastic, or rubber, and the mechanism of action is said to be alkylation of proteins and nucleic acids, leading to microbial death. They are available as 40% solution in water. 8% solution has a broad spectrum of activity, and the sporicidal activity may require up to 18 hours. It has faster action when dissolved in 70% isopropanol. So formaldehyde are used in high-level disinfection such as hemodialyzer, vaccine preparation, and of course, maybe you will learn in Pato, it is used as a tissue preservation and embalming. Please also remember that your 4% formaldehyde may not be mycobactericidal, and it can be irritating to the eyes. It has, as you know, a pungent odor and classified as a potential carcinogen, especially if exposed for a very, very long time and frequently. So lastly are your sterilants. So sterilization, also known as autoclaving, this is the standard method of sterilization for many years. And this involves pressurized steam at 120 degrees for 30 minutes. And it is used for heat-resistant instruments and materials. Ethylene oxide sterilization is used if your autoclaving is not possible. And now let's talk about the last topic for antibiotics. So the clinical use of antimicrobial agents. This will just be a brief topic, no? Because of course, when you go to third year, that's when you will have an in-depth discussion about the clinical uses of your antibiotics. But at this level, since you are already in second year and we're talking about antibiotics, it is important, no, for you to know a little bit about the use of your antimicrobial clinically. At least you know the basic of it. So when you say an empiric antimicrobial therapy, empiric or presumptive therapy refers to starting your antimicrobial treatment based on clinical experience and the typical causes of a condition before a specific pathogen is identified. So the goal of this is to improve the outcomes by initiating early treatment, especially in potentially serious or life-threatening conditions. And in some conditions, such as febrile neutropenia in cancer patients, clinical trials have shown that empiric therapy reduces morbidity and mortality. And often, the exact pathogen is identified in only a minority of cases, yet treatment is still beneficial. Excuse me. So basically, when you say empiric antibiotic therapy, it is when you start a certain antibiotic for a certain, for example, a patient na lang, no? Came at the emergency room with difficulty of breathing and with upon physical examination, you have desaturation, tachycardic, tachypnea, and you have crackles all over the lung fields. And you diagnose this patient as having pneumonia. So since you are in the ER level and of course you still do not have culture results, no? So you have to give empiric antibiotic treatment right away. So your basis for giving empiric treatment will depend on what is the most common etiologic agent for that kind of pneumonia. So if, for example, this is an adult pneumonia and you're considering a community-acquired pneumonia, the most common is Streptococcus pneumoniae. So therefore, you have to give antibiotics that will target Streptococcus pneumoniae before the result of your culture. Once the result of your culture will arrive, then you have to shift your antibiotics depending on the sensitivity based on the culture. So that is what is meant by empiric antimicrobial therapy. So, excuse me, just like in the scenario, so if you have that kind of patient, no, patient came in with difficulty of breathing, so you have to make a clinical diagnosis that this is a possible pneumonia, for example. And then you have to obtain the specimen. So, for example, you have to take sputum gram stain and culture and even blood culture for laboratory examination. And then you need to formulate a microbiologic diagnosis. And for example, in um, our case, Streptococcus pneumoniae, because that is the most common, right, for pneumonia, and determine the necessity for empiric treatment. So, since the patient is already tachypneic and tachycardic, no, so you really need to start an antibiotic already. And then finally, you have to institute your treatment. So you have to choose what is the um, recommended or most commonly used antibiotics for pneumonia. So that is how basically you should think about when you are going to start your empiric therapy. So selection from among several drugs depends on the host factors that include the following. So if the patient has a concomitant disease, for example, HIV, on chemotherapy, cancer, organ transplant, especially if the patient has a severe liver or kidney disease, or use of immunosuppressive medication. You also need to ask no, if the patient has previous allergies or adverse drug effects, if the patient has impaired elimination, so if you have a problem in the kidneys or liver, the age of the patient, of course, elderly patients, you should be more cautious when starting antibiotics. Pregnancy status, of course, because you have to know if the antibiotic is safe during pregnancy or not. And epidemiologic exposure, for example, you have a family member that is also sick, or a pet, sexual partner, occupational exposure, recent travel, and even recent hospitalization. So basically, these are the things actually that you ask, di ba? When you do your history taking. So, based on these things, no, so you will know what kind of antibiotics that you're going to start to your patients for a certain disease. So again, let's define what is a bacteriostatic antibiotic. It is an antibiotic that causes reversible inhibition of growth. So the bacteria is still present and able to replicate should the bacteriostatic antibiotic be removed. A bacteriostatic antibiotic therefore prevents the exponential growth of bacteria, allowing the host immune system better chances of clearing the bacteria that is present in the body. So I hope that is clear. So when you say bacteriostatic, no, you need your immune system pa rin to fight off the microorganism. So it will just prevent the exponential growth of the bacteria. Okay? As compared with bactericidal, irreversible inhibition of growth, therefore directly killing your bacteria. So ibig sabihin, kahit wala masyadong tulong yung immunity or yung immune system mo, no? So that is your bactericidal antibiotic. So why should bacteriostatic and bactericidal antibiotics not be given together? Because bacteriostatic drugs will antagonize the effects of your bactericidal drugs, which rely on the active replication and utilization of environmental resources by the bacteria. So it is also mentioned that the distinction is not clear. This is partially dependent on on its concentration, and the distinction is rarely of clinical significance except if you have an immunocompromised patients. Since immunocompromised patients na, no, you have to give bactericidal agents right away. Okay? And that is very necessary because the host immune system is not capable of final elimination of the bacteria. Remember, your bacteriostatic antibiotics still depend on the host's immunity. So if you are immunocompromised, of course, your immunity is low. Therefore, if you give a bacteriostatic antibiotic, it will not be that effective because the immunity is already low. But if you give a bactericidal antibiotic, no, so it's a must, no, and that is really necessary for you to kill the microorganism for an immunocompromised patient. Next, we have antimicrobial drug combinations. So while most infections should be treated with a single antimicrobial agent, combination therapy may still be justified in specific situations. And unnecessary combination therapy can increase the risk such as toxicity, increase cost, and reduce efficacy. So what are the reasons for combination therapy? So broad spectrum empiric therapy in seriously ill patients will cover a wide range of possible pathogens before the causative agent is identified. Treatment of polymicrobial infections, for example, intra-abdominal abscess, for example, may involve different kinds of microorganisms such as anaerobes, aerobic gram-negative bacteria, and enterococci. And note that some single agents such as beta-lactamase inhibitor combinations or carbapenem can cover multiple pathogens and may reduce the need for combinations. Next is prevention of resistance emergence, especially in diseases such as TB, where combination therapy reduces the risk of resistant strains developing. So later on, you will learn about anti-TB medications, and you will know that the treatment for tuberculosis are combinations of drugs, no? So you will know that later. So why is it so? For the prevention of resistance that is already emerging in our country. Next is reduction of dose-related toxicity. So by combining drugs, no, lower doses of each can be used to limit toxicity. Example, amphotericin B and flucytosine, in cryptococcal meningitis allows lower amphotericin B dose and reduces the risk of your nephrotoxicity. And lastly is synergy, because some combinations work better together than alone, and this will improve bacterial killing or inhibition. And next, let's talk about antimicrobial prophylaxis. So this should be used in circumstances in which efficacy has been demonstrated and benefits outweigh the risk of prophylaxis. So it is divided into surgical and non-surgical prophylaxis. So when you say surgical prophylaxis, you have the surgical wound infections, which are a major type of nosocomial or hospital-acquired infections. And prophylactic antimicrobials are used to prevent post-op infections and not really treating actual infection. So it is more on prevention. So it is recommended for surgical procedures that are contaminated and clean contaminated surgeries such as the following: for selected clean surgeries such as prosthetic materials, surgery is high risk such as open heart surgery, and procedures in immunocompromised patients due to increased risk of infection. Even minor surgeries may warrant prophylaxis. So the goal of surgical prophylaxis is, of course, reduce the risk of your surgical site infection, prevent morbidity, mortality, and extended hospital stays. So the chosen antimicrobial should be active against the most likely pathogen for the surgical site. And the timing is critical. Usually it is administered within 60 minutes or 1 hour before incision. So this is lifted from your book, Katsung. And as you can see here, different types of surgical procedures, no? And then you have the different types of antibiotics that can be given. But as you can see in general, It is mostly cefazolin. Cefazolin, 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 cefazolin. Okay? As surgical prophylaxis. And when you say non-surgical naman, this is for the use of antimicrobial drugs to prevent colonization or a symptomatic infection or interrupt infection progression after exposure but before clinical disease develops. So the timing, it is administered before the disease onset, either before exposure or immediately after exposure or inoculation. The purpose is to prevent infection, especially in high-risk individuals. So high-risk temporary exposures, these are people at risk of exposure to specific virulent pathogens, especially during an outbreak. So remember, during the COVID times, no, when the vaccine came out, so the priority or high-risk individuals, so that's the medical professionals, no, elderly, patients with diabetes, cancer patients, immunocompromised patients. So those are high-risk individuals. So they are given the vaccines right away. Okay. And the use of your non-surgical prophylaxis increases susceptibility due to underlying conditions. And again, those are your immunocompromised patients and individuals with chronic illnesses or neutropenia. So these are most effective when the target pathogen is well known and that the organism is predictably susceptible to the chosen antimicrobial agents. So these are examples of your non-surgical prophylaxis. So I think what I need you to remember here are just the common ones. Of course, for example, in HIV, for influenza, malaria in some parts of the Philippines. So these are your concomitant prophylaxis. This lang included dito, but it is also good to note and very timely will be your leptospirosis, right? So the prophylaxis is your doxycycline. Okay, so, so please remember that. For meningococcal infection, especially with close contacts, so these are your recommended prophylaxis. For otitis media, especially with recurrent infection, so you have amoxicillin. For pediatric patients, so pertussis, so the prophylaxis for close contacts for the patient will be azithromycin. For pneumocystis jirovecii infection, so you can have trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, dapsone, and for rheumatic fever, you have penicillin. For TB, especially with persons living with tuberculosis and positive for tuberculin skin test, they can take isoniazid already or rifampin. And for patients with urinary tract infection, especially recurrent, diba I mentioned kanina, the use of your nitrofurantoin, no? Primarily, nitrofuran in our country, primarily nitrofurantoin, rather than TMP-SMX for recurrent urinary infection because TMP-SMX already has high resistance, no, for recurrent UTI. So I think this is my last slide. So thank you for listening and have a good day.